And if you genuinely don't believe what the experts are saying, what I'm saying, think about the weather events that you've experienced over the last 5 years, 10 years. And especially if you're older, think about what you've experienced earlier on in your life. Is it exactly the same way you're experiencing rainfall? Is the heat the exact same way you've remembered it to be? And if you do live near a beach, think about when you used to go to the beach and the infrastructure that was around there. Did the beach at the shore where the waves crash, were they at that location when you were a child? Or has it moved further inland? Look at the impacts that are unfolding around you right now and think of that slow burn but continuing in the years to come. And with the current science for climate change, it is only going to become more rapid. What we're seeing now is a slow burn, but eventually it is going to turn into a raging wildfire.
Welcome to another edition of Caribbean Climate Calabash. My name is Hipolito Novelo. I'm here with Kalain, one of the CT fellows here at COP28. And what we'll do this episode is we're going to talk about his experience and some of the negotiation he has been following. Kalain, welcome. How is your experience going so far?
It's been definitely a less chaotic experience compared to Egypt. It definitely feels like it's a lot more organized, just from a logistical standpoint, but we also have double the amount of people from Egypt to here. So with a lot more people and a much larger venue, it's a lot more walking.
Yeah, a lot of walking. How many steps do you think you've managed to get in per day?
I've been tracking it. Generally, I'm getting anywhere between 15 and 20,000 steps a day.
Yeah,
So,
compared to what they're at home.
well, yeah, at home I probably don't even cross 10,000 a day.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
we talk about, okay, so I think over 70,000 delegates and participants here at COP28 in Dubai.
Yeah.
Has it been difficult in getting experts, negotiators for your stories?
No, I think because the Trinidad and Tobago delegation is fairly small and everyone knows everyone. So it's fairly easy to access them with a quick WhatsApp message, or the media center is located right through the meeting room. So you could be walking through there and just run into them. It's been fairly easy to access them. What I would say is the setup of Expo City has made it there's a literal physical barrier between us and side events, meaning you have to open a door to go into each pavilion.
Yeah.
And pray and hope and see what you experience in there is something that you're interested in, versus other COPs, Egypt for example. You could just be walking through a building, you have all of these pavilions that are open, and you can just see what's going on there. If you see something interesting, walk in, make contact with somebody. So I would say that difference has been the challenge this COP in perhaps finding more creative sources.
Yeah, I went to Glasgow. Glasgow was more, how can I say? You had a lot of more creativeness around COP. This time around, I don't see that much, and I agree with you when it comes to the pavilion. You have to open the door to see if anything is happening in there, kind of stuff. So
Yeah, and not every
welcoming.
and not every pavilion has stuff going on. I've gone into several pavilions and it's just like there's nobody here.
Nobody's here. Just see the ways.
Yeah.
But okay, so you've been following several stories and negotiations. Talk to us about that and how it's been going so far.
Yeah, so I mean, I came into this COP after last COP all about loss and damage, and then that story pretty much, I wouldn't say died, but everything happened on day one. We had this landmark decision on operationalizing the loss and damage fund, and yes, we still have negotiations going on in the background of who is going to facilitate this fund, whether it'll be the World Bank, is it going to be its own facility, but that story was knocked out of the park on day one. So now I had to focus on literally everything else. So for me, just following up on the early warnings for all initiative, that was an initiative that began at COP27, the UN Secretary General calling for all countries around the world to be covered under a multi-hazard early warning system by 2027. So looking at the progress of that initiative, as well as some of the challenges, the opportunities, and how that initiative has played out over the last year and what's still to come.
In terms of loss and damage, I spoke to some of the leaders of the Caribbean, some of the prime ministers, and basically they say that it's pledges.
Yeah.
They're not counting their chickens. They won't be dancing until they see the money's movement, right? And as we were talking in one of the climate trackers meeting, is that while these are pledges, I think 775 million USD so far. Um, some of them are loans, not essentially grants.
Yeah, so the funding itself for loss and damage is a contentious one because one, we're starting off with pledges, which means there's the opportunity for some of these countries to renege on the pledges. We also have to consider the timing of this COP with national budgets. This money that is currently being pledged will come out of budgets that have already been established. So you may see in the next budget cycle, you might have, well, national governments don't want to approve this money or they may approve more. And then where is that money going to be hosted, right? Is if it's going to be with the World Bank, is it going to have the usual strings attached for developing countries? And then is it going to be tied up the same way that developing countries have to be tied up in paperwork and the lengthy time frame to actually access the fund the same way the Green Climate Fund or the Global GEF exists? There's still a lot of challenges, even though operationalizing this fund was a big achievement. Only a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think Prime Minister Stewart had mentioned that one of the key factors that Caribbean and other states countries should take into consideration would be how do we access the loss and damage fund and how soon and when do we access. For example, let's say if a hurricane, God forbid, happens this weekend, how many years would it take for you to access that loss and damage fund?
Yeah.
As you mentioned, any strings attached, would it be actual one loan or just completely a grant? So I think many Caribbean countries are negotiators going into this second week of COP. We'll be looking at that. But in terms of getting information from your sources, how has that been going so far?
Great, honestly. Well, in the Caribbean, we advise. I would say we, meaning the governments that are here at COP that are in the negotiation process. They're advised by Climate Analytics, many of them. So I have a good working relationship with a lot of the members within Climate Analytics. They have been really receptive to the questions. So yeah, getting the sources for a Caribbean perspective has been a breeze.
One of the things I want to talk to you about is that the Alliance of Small Island Development States.
Yes.
You're moderating some events for them, and you've been involved with them in terms of their platter here at COP28. I've heard that some of the negotiations are being challenging going into the second week for 6 countries. Can you shed light on that?
Well, yeah, it's always a challenge when you have developing countries who are on the front lines of climate change, experiencing the impacts, and then you have these wealthier countries who are really just prolonging the problem of climate change with keeping fossil fuels going, with not wanting to phase out fossil fuels. And for the audience, I mean, I presume the audience would be aware fossil fuels produce greenhouse gases when
Yeah.
burnt, and greenhouse gases are the reason we're in this problem because it warms the earth even more. So when it comes to the negotiations process, I spoke to my negotiator just on background the other day, and he was like, at the point where we are at right now, the negotiations are proceeding as expected. Because as we get into week 2, which begun on Friday, we tend to see the really hard negotiations begin on the text of the different agreements and even the political statement that would be revealed at the end. So right now, there's a lot of focus on the GST. I believe we're up to global stocktake, which is what we're up to 24, 27 pages with close to 100 different options on there. So there's still a lot to be negotiated. Small island states obviously will be better having a collective voice behind some of these options. That's why negotiating blocks like AOSIS are there.
Okay, so everything you've explained now, in terms of climate change, global issue, everyone should care about it, everyone should pay attention about it. But how do you translate that to the masses? Sort of like to make it like a sexy journalism.
Yeah,
kind of
so
thing, because,
I understand that. So I always say the best way to make these issues palatable to the average Joe would be, how does this affect you? How does the global stocktake affect you? Because the global stocktake, if done right, will look at the progress that countries have made to achieving the Paris Agreement goals through your nationally determined contributions for each country. Then, after countries look at the available science and what has been done, are we even close to meeting the targets? The large answer is no. We are 80% away from doing that. So now we have to come back with creating more ambitious targets that need to be revealed by 2025, according to the executive secretary of the UNFCCC. to bridge that gap to make sure we don't go into a planet where we surpass 2 degrees of warming above pre-industrial levels. Now that is all well and good scientifically, but how does that translate to the people on the ground? What does a planet that has warmed beyond 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels look like for you? Does that mean you can't go to the beach anymore because that beach is now perpetually flooded? Does that mean your rains that you tend to see during the wet season in the Caribbean region, is that it's going to get drier? That means no available water for you when the dry season comes, because a lot of our Caribbean islands use surface water as our water sources. Then when we start to get really hot temperatures during the hurricane season, as hurricanes move past us, how hot is that going to be, and what are governments going to do to keep us cool? And then when the hurricanes do hit us, what does that mean in a warmer world? Because I can tell you, based on the latest available science, they're moving slower, they're getting stronger, and they are producing more rainfall. All of these things have major implications for us in the Caribbean region, because we are the second most disaster-prone region in the world.
So, as a journalist, as a weather expert, why is it important for you to be here?
Oh, wow, that's a good question. So I think for me, it is a great opportunity to learn from the world experts on the IPCC. They are the ones that are writing the reports that outline the best available science. Learn from other countries who are facing the same challenges we're facing in the Caribbean region, and also network with other journalists who come from countries like the Caribbean, small island developing states, developing countries. Hear their stories, hear their best practices on how best they translate the science to their audience, and see if there's any way I can improve as a journalist as well. And I think coming to these global conferences, you get an appreciation of the work that is being done on an international stage, and the ability to translate that to the public so that public knows this is not just a talk show.
Okay, so last question, Kalain. What would you say to anyone who would come up to you and say, you know what, you guys are exaggerating. The world isn't going kaboom in the next 20 years. What would you want to tell them?
I would tell them, think about what happened during the pandemic, a COVID-19 pandemic. It was a problem that started off very small. The origins of COVID-19, it started off very small. We were hearing the early reports in November 2019. And then that grew very quickly, very fast around the world. Climate change is like a pandemic, but it is a much larger and more prolonged issue. We won't be able to create a vaccine that would be able to, be that quote unquote silver bullet. And even then, the COVID-19 vaccine wasn't a silver bullet. We're still living with COVID-19 today. Climate change is going to be one of the issues that will stick with us through generations, because it's not like we can pull all of the carbon out of the atmosphere overnight. So, to answer your question, for climate change, we are going to be facing the issues not only now, but next year and the years to come. And if you genuinely don't believe what the experts are saying, what I'm saying, think about the weather events that you've experienced over the last 5 years, 10 years. And especially if you're older, think about what you've experienced earlier on in your life. Is it exactly the same way you're experiencing rainfall? Is the heat the exact same way you've remembered it to be? And if you do live near a beach, think about when you used to go to the beach and the infrastructure that was around there. Did the beach at the shore where the waves crash, were they at that location when you were a child? Or has it moved further inland? Look at the impacts that are unfolding around you right now, and think of that slow burn, but continuing in the years to come. And with the current science for climate change, it is only going to become more rapid. What we're seeing now is a slow burn, but eventually it is going to turn into a raging wildfire.
Great, Kalain. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and knowledge and your facts. Where can we see or read your stories?
You can read my stories on the Trinidad and Tobago Guardian newspaper, and you can view my stories on CNC3 News Trinidad and Tobago, and all of them will be posted on our online platforms as well.
Yeah, and including climatetracker.org. That's climatetracker.org. Thank you so much, guys, for listening to this podcast, and join us again. Stay safe.